Everybody, this is Dream, and this will be the breakdown for the NBA slate tonight on Monday. I think it's a 7-game slate here, and it's a pretty good little slate. Before I get started, thank you guys for the kind words and stuff. I ended up in the hospital on Saturday, and hopefully I will get better pretty quickly. I got some injuries, so I just have to rest. Talking is a little bit difficult, so just bear with me for the next week or so. But overall, should be able to make videos every day for the most part. If I am not, I will post otherwise, and I'll try to post the write-up in the comment area of YouTube. So with that said, let's get on to the injury report today. For the 76ers, Joel Embiid is out. Now, if he's out, that's definitely going to help Melton, and it pretty much helps everybody. So we'll just have to wait and see. On that one, for the Hornets, Rozier is still out, or he's doubtful rather. Confirmed that he's out, but if he is out, then that obviously helps, the other guards on the court as well as Hayward. For the Nets, it looks like Curry might end up playing for, I think, the second game. He's questionable currently, so gonna have to check back on that. But obviously, if he plays, that hurts Joe Harris and a couple other guys a little bit. And then for the Raptors, Van Vliet is questionable. If he's out, that's definitely going to help the other guards on the team as well as Siakam. For the Pistons, Durant is out. He is the backup center, so I suspect that Stewart is going to get a little bit more run. And then Nerlens Noel may get his first look today. For the Grizzlies, Morant is questionable. Obviously, if he's out, then that would help Trey Jones a lot. But we have to... Ty Jones a lot, my fault. So we'll have to see about him. For the Jazz, Kessler is questionable. For the Clippers, Leonard is out, Wall is doubtful, and Covington is questionable. This would obviously help a lot of guys, but everybody's been super inconsistent on that team, and the injuries have been inconsistent day to day. So obviously gonna have to check out to see if Paul George is playing, and then who's end up starting and stuff like that. But overall, those are the injuries today. So with that said, let's get into the guards themselves. First of all, we're going to look at Dennis Smith for Charlotte. Now, obviously, assuming that Rozier is out, he's a pretty good play today at the price point. He has upside that's, pretty good here, but his floor has been a little bit inconsistent so far this season, even though he's starting. So do keep that in mind. But overall, he's a good play as long as they don't get blown out. And this is the type of game where I think both teams will score a lot of points. He should be a solid option, and his price is kind of steadied, so I do like him on this particular slate. Then we're going to look at Trae Young for Atlanta. He's been absolutely dominating so far this season. His price point is about the same as it's been the entire way, and he's really playing well in the offense now. Now, he does have a little bit of a tougher matchup here, but as you can see, the teams he's played Orlando, who's a little bit of a slowdown team, and Milwaukee, who's a slowdown team, and he's dominated both of those. So I look for him to continue to dominate in this particular matchup against Toronto, especially if Toronto's missing some pieces. Then we're going to look at Scotty Barnes. So if Van Vliet is out, he's definitely going to get a nice little boost. He's been inconsistent so far this season, but he's still been pretty good. Obviously, he got injured in the Miami game, which hurt him a little bit, but he was good in the other games, and his price point is pretty fair for his potential. He just needs 32.5 fantasy points in order to 5x here. Then we're going to look at Tyrese Halliburton for Indiana, who's been absolutely dominating teams so far this season. In fact, he's not had a single game under 40 fantasy points so far. He does have a tougher matchup against Brooklyn, but in the last game against Brooklyn, he had 53 fantasy points. His upside is really good here, and he's been getting a lot of peripheral assists and rebounds. So if he can get a double-double here, that would also make him really good. But he runs and controls the offense, and he's going to have a lot of upside in this kind of matchup. Then we're going to look at D'Anthony Melton, sorry. For Philly, he's really dependent on if he ends up starting, if Embiid is out. If he starts, he's almost a must-play on DraftKings at his price point. And so I do like him a lot on this particular slate, but you do have to check out for that. Then we're going to look at Buddy Hield for Indiana. His price point seems a little bit too cheap for his production. He does have a low floor because he has played kind of sporadic minutes, but the last 4 games, his minutes have kind of leveled up, And so with the way he's playing, I think he's in a great spot here. He's also getting a decent amount of rebounds and assists, which definitely boosts his stats. And he's shooting the ball pretty well, so I think he's a pretty solid option. I think he's got 17 threes in the last three games, so if he can keep shooting like that, then that's definitely going to make him a good play on this particular slate. Then we're going to look at Jordan Clarkson for Utah. He's been pretty solid so far this season. His price point has actually come down a little bit. Obviously, his floor is pretty good, so he's got a nice matchup here against Memphis, and I suspect that he'll have a pretty solid opportunity here to have a solid game, especially if John Morant's out. Then we're going to look at Paul George. Now, Paul George has been completely inconsistent so far this season, much like everybody on the Clippers. I don't like this team, but they're facing Houston, who's been giving up a lot of fantasy points, and overall he's got upside because of his price point. But again, he's been super inconsistent so far this season. He's getting lots of shots, but he's not shooting the ball well. But the one game he shot the ball well against Sacramento, he scored 62 fantasy points, so that's definitely his upside in this particular game. But you got to be aware of his low side, and who knows what's going to happen in that game. And then Kevin Huerter for Sacramento. He's been playing really well so far this season. He's a little bit boomer bust, but he's been playing good, even with Keegan Murray in the lineup. He hasn't really lost a lot from that. That's been more Harrison Barnes' lost effort there. Now, he is very dependent on threes to really do well, so you do have to be aware of that. But he's actually getting assists and rebounds as well now, and so as long as he can continue that, then he'll be a good spot. And he's going against Charlotte, who's not very good. So then we're going to look at Gordon Hayward for Charlotte, who's in a nice plus matchup here, and he's been really solid so far since Rozier's out. He's not gonna get you a 45 fantasy point game, but he's been in the 30s every game about, with one exception, and so I think he's in a good spot in this matchup here against Sacramento. And his price has actually come back down a little bit, and so I think he's a good play today. Then we're gonna look at Kelly Oubre, who's the extreme boomer bust option for Charlotte. As you can see, he has games where he scores 35 or 40, and then has games where he scores under 20. And so it's just a matter of the game-to-game situation. But this game is a plus matchup, and I do think he's somebody you have to consider. But again, he is a GPP play as a result of his inconsistencies. And then Tobias Harris, he just seems a little bit too cheap, especially if Embiid is out. Now, his production has been a little bit lacking more than we usually like. But his price point has come down a little bit too, and so he seems like a pretty safe play here. The real big issue is that Maxi's kind of stealing a lot of his shots now. Even with injuries to the team, he hasn't been getting as many shots as he got last season. Obviously, with Embiid out, it gives him more upside. So you do have to take care about that. But he did get more shots in the other game against Toronto whenever Embiid was out. He shot more shots than he had shot in any other game, or at least tied it. He just didn't shoot the ball as well, and so you do have to be aware of that. But he's still 5x in that game, so I think that's going to be fairly easy for him, assuming that Embiid is out. Then we're going to look at Jalen Smith for Indiana against Brooklyn. Now, Brooklyn has not been good against power forwards, so I look for him to have a pretty solid game. Though he is getting less shots than he was early in the season because of Miles Turner being back. But I still think he has upside in this particular matchup. Isaiah Stewart looks really good today against Milwaukee. Now, he's been extremely solid so far this season. His price point is actually pretty fair still, and so I do think he's in a good spot. Then we look at Bobby Portis for Milwaukee. I wish he was starting because he's capped when it comes to minutes, around 25, 26 minutes. But he's still getting almost 30 fantasy points a game, and he's had a couple big ones, especially against Brooklyn. He is playing Detroit today. He's also a team that doesn't do well against big guys, so I do like him a lot. But he's been. I wish he was going to get more minutes, locked in as a starter. But overall, he's been solid, and so I think he's a great play on this particular slate. Then we're going to look at Jared Vanderbilt, who's been a little bit inconsistent so far this season, but he's got a plus matchup here against Memphis. And he's been good against them already this season, and I look for him to continue to be pretty solid. The only real risk here is his minutes are really inconsistent, and so that's a problem with the Jazz because they got some good depth at that position. And then Bojan Bogdanovic for Detroit. obviously Milwaukee is a pretty good team, but he's been playing extremely well, been extremely consistent. Uh, his price point is come up a little bit, but has actually come down from its high last couple games, and I think he's a pretty safe play. I don't think he's like the best play by any stretch of imagination, but if you want a 25 to 35 point guy, this is your dude. And so, obviously, if he's kind of the type of guy that if I have $5,700 left, or 6,000 or low left, and I need to throw somebody in the utility spot, he's the guy I would put in there. Then we're gonna look at the Senators here, and Miles Turner comes off the board at $5,500 after last game where he scored 27 fantasy regular points and had 54 fantasy points. Obviously, that was against Washington, is kind of trash, but Brooklyn is terrible against centers as well, and so I look for him to have a potentially good game here. Now, obviously, he didn't play the next game, so you do have to take that in consideration. But it looks like his minutes are going to continue to rise, and so he'll have lots of upside, especially if he can get double doubles. His price point is just way too cheap for his potential. Then we're going to look at Sengun for Houston. He's in a pretty good spot here against the Clippers, who are crazy right now. He's been really solid so far, especially if he's starting, so make sure he starts. But if he does start, then he's going to be a great play on the slate. He's just entirely too cheap for his production. Then we're going to look at Plumlee for the Hornets. Now, the risk with Plumlee is that Nick Richards is playing really well off the bench behind him, and they're basically splitting it minutes at center, both playing around 20 or so minutes a game. Sometimes one gets more because they play extremely well, and you can see that reflected in the scores and stuff here. But overall, he's a solid play at a cheap price point, and so if he, assuming that he plays well, then he'll continue to be the starter. Brook Lopez looks, I don't love him because he's usually a really inconsistent player for the Bucks, but he has been solid so far this season, because with Middleton out, he's getting a lot of extra shots, which give him some upside here. He's also hitting three balls, which is definitely beneficial to fantasy. And his price point seems a little bit too cheap for what his production has been. But just be aware that he can have a random 10 fantasy point game, and so I don't love him because of that. And then finally, last but not least, Pascal Siakam. He's just been absolutely dominating so far this season. His price point is up, but it's still pretty fair. And this is a pretty good matchup for him against Atlanta, and I expect him to go crazy in this one, especially if Van Vliet is out. He's going to have to be, your point center type of thing going on here, getting lots of assists every game. And if Van Vliet is out, he'll have to do that even more. Plus, he just dominates getting the ball. So, with that said, that's what I have for this slate. Obviously, there's lots of injuries to consider today, so that information won't come out until close to their launch. But keep track of those injuries. And if you want to join the Discord, we actually have that information in there. So thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing, and have a nice day, guys.